Swazi Tshabalala, recently stepped down as Senior Vice President of the African Development Bank Group, has begun his campaign for the presidency of the bank. In this exclusive edition of the Interview Ayanda Dlodlo, special envoy for Mrs Swazi Tshabalala shares her programs, her vision, her ambitions for the AfDB in the face of today's economic, social and climate challenges. Mrs Ayanda Dlodlo, welcome to Africa 24.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
It's a pleasure to have you. Why do you believe that Mrs. Tshabalala is the right leader at this critical moment in Africa's development financing story?
Okay. First and foremost, thank you very much for inviting us to the interview to sell our candidate and who she is to the African people. She is an African girl, grew up in Soweto during the period of apartheid, but elevated herself to the position of leadership in a number of organizations, both in the private and the public and the private sectors, working in the logistics sector, in the banking sector, in the telecommunications sector, insurance sector, but also did projects across the continent spanning the infrastructure group of investments, either as part of the Transnet Group, which is South Africa's public sector logistics company, or part of the banking sector in terms of closing deals for funding for projects across the continent on infrastructure. So this is where she comes from. Over 30 years of experience at a senior leadership level. But not only that, where she talks about issues of ensuring that the private sector is developed, she also was an entrepreneur at some point who ran her own company. So she straddles a lot of things.
All right. From 1964 to 2024, the bank has officially financed 6,500 projects across the continent, and in 60 years of the institution's capital has grown from $200 and $500 million to $380 million. How does she intend to make the AfDB more effective in achieving the African Union's Agenda 2063 for a prosperous and integrated Africa?
The most important issues that she speaks about are integration, integrated activities, integrated planning, integrated delivery systems, but also she talks about accountability and ensuring that countries speak to one another, but more importantly, partnerships for her to be able to scale up on the vision that she has for the continent in terms of increasing productivity in the continent. Her strategy basically is about what she calls Lift Africa. It's about large, integrated, quality infrastructure that spans across regions, in country, really as part of what would be required to catalyze and upscale what the Africa Continental Free Trade Area speaks about, the AfCFTA speaks about. In line with that, our forebears, our forefathers have always spoken about integration of the regions. So the integrated part of her LIFT strategy specifically speaks to that. No country can plan large infrastructure, whether it's road, whether it's optic fiber, whether it is rail systems, air systems and all of that, without integrating all of that to effect the increase and enhancement of productivity in the continent.
Accelerating industrialization, engaging the private sector, combating climate change, providing access to energy, reducing debt, and improving infrastructure are Africa's main challenges for sustainable economic growth. How does she intend to meet all these challenges?
Well, as I said, with her LIFT strategy, the LI is about large integrated quality infrastructure. That infrastructure, as I said, is roads, it's rail, it's energy, it's telecommunication systems, which means the connectivity of the continent. Africa needs 500,000 kilometers of a layout of fiber optic for it to be fully connected at a value of $15 million. So that money has to be found some way to effect the outlay and connectivity of the continent. But she also talks about financial innovation, which is the F part of the LIFT strategy, financial innovation and private sector development. In other countries, the private sector is not fully developed. What that requires is for governments to create an enabling environment for the private sector to flourish. So a change in policy, a change in regulations, concrete support for the private sector so that the private sector can work in sync with governments to effect the change that is required from an infrastructure perspective. Governments cannot do everything on their own. In this infrastructure vision that she has for the continent, and all of that really is about increasing and enhancing productivity in the continent.
Given the decline in foreign aid to Africa, with the United States, I'm coming there, announcing that it would cease granting $555 million to the African Development Fund, what innovative financing mechanisms does she intend to defend at the head of the AfDB if she is elected president?
Okay, there's a lot of money that sits in the continent that is underutilized, but some of that money is invested outside the continent. And I will give you the example of South Africa. We have about 1.3 million workers who contribute towards a pension fund. That pension fund, as we speak today, is I think it's about 3 trillion rand. That money is what gets invested in projects in South Africa, but also gets invested in projects across the continent, but not only across the continent, even outside. Now, you can imagine how many such pension funds and other funds, for instance, that exist in the continent. If you can be able to pull that together and have these partnerships with these funds across the continent, and also drawing on the the development finance institutions across the continent, a lot can be harnessed in terms of value, in terms of rands and cents or dollars and cents or euros or francs. The money does exist. It's just a matter of forming coalitions, integration, and also partnerships. Then you'll be able to harness what is available. It is true. Most countries are facing fiscal challenges. ODA has declined. The issue about America withholding funding for the African Development Bank is something that is worrisome. But we always say, out of a crisis or a challenge, an opportunity always exists. So this is the opportunity that we need to be seeking so that it gives us a solution to the problem that will be faced with what is going on right now.
If she's elected president, she will be the first woman ever to head such an institutions. In her vision, how can the AfDB better empower women across the continent?
Well, she will be the first woman in the continent to run the African Development Bank. We have women who run. Christine Lagarde, she runs the European Central Bank. You have Kristalina, who runs the IMF. We have women that run these institutions, and they have run them effectively. Now, what that means for women in the continent, I mean, the messages that we get from young women even, saying just by you running for this position is an inspiration to us as young people that a woman can be able to go into a race that has always been male-dominated, and we hope that you will win. Now, a win for a female candidate means that you will also have to look at what women and the youth need in the continent for them to be able to access financing, for them to be able to access support for their businesses, whether it is in kind or in financing, because some of them need incubation, they need to be elevated, they need to be assisted to access markets. So she will have a fully fledged program from a private sector perspective to ensure that the private sector in the continent is fully developed. And that starts with the small man or small woman in the street, or the youth who have small companies and have a hope of growing those companies. The conducive environment needs to be established and created by the governments to ensure that what she does in the bank is also aligned with the policies and the programs of countries to help her to enhance and grow the private sector in countries, but especially women in the private sector.
Mrs. Ayanda Dlodlo, this takes us to the end of this program. Thank you for answering Africa 24's English questions.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Ladies and gents, here comes the end of this program, but get more on Africa24TV.com and on the app, My Africa 24. See you soon.